Hello, welcome everyone. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started with the presentation. Please close all running applications to help maintain a stable audio and video connection. If your connection freezes, please exit GoToWebinar and return to the session. You may enter questions in the questions section of GoToWebinar at any time during the presentation. And if we don't have time to answer all the questions received during this presentation, we will answer those questions to webinar participants directly following the webinar. We'll be answering all the questions at the end of the presentation. So we'll get started with a territory acknowledgement. We acknowledge the lands upon which CASLPO offices operate as traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We acknowledge that Toronto, a Mohawk word meaning the land where trees stand in the water, is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are thankful to the people who have since time immemorial cared for Turtle Island, which includes the land we now call Ontario. By acknowledging the traditional Indigenous territories and our relationship to them, we have the opportunity to recognize the rights and history of Indigenous peoples. This acknowledgement is also a small way for us to dismantle the continued impacts of colonialism and recognize the calls for action for truth and reconciliation. So before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to introduce the speakers today. My name is Colleen Myrie. I'm the Director of Registration Services here at the college, and I'm joined by Cassandra.
My name is Cassandra Kaminskas, and I am the Manager of Mentorship and Audiology Practice Advisor with the college. We're also joined today by my colleague Vera.
Hi, I'm Vera. I'm the Admin Assistant for Registration and also the Mentorship Coordinator.
Great. Also online with us today, answering questions in the chat and moderating questions at the end of the presentation are Ira Davalos, CASLPO's Program Assistant for Registration Services, and Bia Rana, CASLPO's DEI Coordinator and International Applications Registrant Assistant. So today's agenda will cover the following overview of CASLPO's registration and mentorship requirements. We'll begin discussing the importance of registration and licensure, including CASLPO's role as a regulatory college for audiologists and speech-language pathologists in Ontario. Next, we'll look at good character. This is an important part of registration, which relates to public protection, professional conduct, and the trust placed in regulated health professionals. The third section will focus on becoming a CASLPO registrant. We'll cover the Canadian Enter to Practice exam, the application process, the registration process, including what applicants need to submit and when. And finally, we will review CASLPO's mentorship program. This section will explain the role of mentorship for initial practice registrants and how it supports safe, competent, and ethical practice. By the end of the session, participants should have a clear understanding of the college, the steps involved with CASLPO's registration process, and the mentorship program. So what is CASLPO? CASLPO stands for the College of Audiologists and Speech-Language Pathologists of Ontario. CASLPO is the regulatory body for audiologists and speech-language pathologists in Ontario. Its role is to protect the public by making sure that only qualified individuals are registered to practice these professions. This means CASLPO sets registration requirements, establishes professional standards, and helps ensure registrants practice safely, competently, and ethically. It's important to understand that CASLPO is a regulator, not a school, not an employer, or a professional association. Its primary responsibility is to protect the public. For applicants, this means a registration with the college is required before they can practice as an audiologist or a speech-language pathologist in Ontario. CASLPO provides the following services and regulatory functions. First, CASLPO manages registration and renewal. This includes reviewing applications, issuing certificates of registration, maintaining the public register, and overseeing annual renewal for registrants. CASLPO also administers the mentorship program for initial registrants. The mentorship process supports new registrants as they begin practicing in Ontario and helps confirm that they are meeting professional expectations. Quality assurance is another important part of CASLPO's work. Through this program, CASLPO supports ongoing competence and helps ensure registrants continue to practice safely and effectively throughout their careers. CASLPO also provides professional practice advice. Registrants can contact the college for guidance on standards, ethical obligations, practice expectations, and professional responsibilities. Finally, CASLPO manages complaints and discipline. This is part of the college's public protection role and provides a formal process for addressing concerns about a registrant's conduct or practice. It's important to note that CASLPO's work is not limited to registration. The college continues to regulate and support professional accountability throughout a registrant's career. In Ontario, audiology and speech-language pathology are regulated professions. This means a person must be registered with CASLPO before they can legally practice in either profession. Registration is not optional. It is not the same as having a job offer, completing education, or submitting an application. An applicant must have an active CASLPO registration number before beginning to work as an audiologist or speech-language pathologist in Ontario. This means applicants should not see patients, provide clinical services, or present themselves as able to practice audiology or speech-language pathology before registration has been issued. CASLPO's role is grounded in public protection. The college sets minimum entry to practice requirements for audiologists and speech-language pathologists to help ensure safe and competent care. Registration shows that an individual has met those baseline qualifications. Without regulations or registration, the public would face greater risk for unsafe or unqualified providers. Once somebody is registered, they are legally authorized to use the restricted titles in Ontario. This includes titles such as audiologist, speech-language pathologist, and speech therapist, as well as abbreviations and variations on these titles. Before registration is issued, applicants must not use these titles in resumes, email signatures, business cards, websites, social media profiles, employment materials, or communication with clients. Registration also gives a registrant the legal authority to present themselves to the public as qualified to practice audiology or speech-language pathology. It also means that before CASLPO registration is issued, an applicant should not present themselves as available to provide audiology or speech-language pathology services and should not begin seeing clients or booking patients as an audiologist or a speech-language pathologist. Throughout the presentation, we will use short scenarios to bring the concepts we are discussing to life. Our first scenario is about title infringement. This scenario introduces Mia, a recent graduate of the master's program in speech-language pathology in Ontario. She has submitted an application to CASLPO, and she has not yet been registered. While waiting for her registration to be processed, she begins working at a private clinic as support personnel under the supervision of a CASLPO registered speech-language pathologist. The problem begins when Mia updates her LinkedIn and Instagram profiles to describe herself as a pre-registered speech-language pathologist. She also uses the abbreviation SLP in her email signature. Even though she may have intended this to describe her background or status, these are still using forms of the restricted title. A parent later looks for Mia on the public register and cannot find her name and contacts the college. As a result, CASLPO sends Mia a cease and desist notice for title infringement. This is a serious issue because misuse of the protected title can also raise concerns during the registration process. So instead of what Mia had done originally, here are just some alternatives. Instead of saying that she's a pre-registered speech-language pathologist, just indicating that she is a speech-language pathology assistant in Toronto working with children ages 2 to 6 would suffice. As well, instead of indicating that she has a Master's of Science with the abbreviation SLP, it's better to spell it out as speech-language pathology. And again, in the email signature, it's better to avoid the SLP abbreviation again in your email signatures. The main takeaway is that applicants can describe their education and experience, but they should avoid using wordings that suggest that they hold the restricted title. So before applying for registration, we encourage applicants to review CASLPO's standard use of restricted titles. This document explains how restricted titles may be used and how applicants can accurately represent themselves before they become registered. To avoid delays or concerns, registrants or applicants must follow rules about restricted titles and must not use protected professional titles before registration is issued. These rules do not prevent applicants from listing academic credentials on their resume, in their LinkedIn profile, or other application materials. We've just provided a few examples on this slide of how you can list your academic credentials. And of course, they're all in that standard as well about use of the restricted title. All right. So before we move further into CASLPO's registration process, it's important to understand what the college means by good character. Good character means that there is a reasonable basis to believe that an applicant can practice safely, honestly, lawfully, and professionally. In other words, CASLPO is looking for assurances that an applicant's conduct, judgment, and professional behavior supports public protection and trust in the profession. For CASLPO registration, this means that an applicant is expected to first, practice safely. This means showing that they can make reasonable decisions, manage risk appropriately, and protect patients from harm. Second, act with decency, integrity, and honesty. Applicants are expected to be truthful, ethical, and transparent in their professional conduct. Third, follow the law. This includes complying with legal requirements, professional regulations, and any obligations that apply to regulated health professionals. And finally, demonstrate an appropriate professional attitude. This means behaving respectfully, taking accountability, responding appropriately to feedback, and showing the maturity expected of someone entering a regulated health profession. So our next scenario looks at good character. In this scenario, we have Zola, who is close to completing the registration process, but she has not finished it yet. For her initial certificate, she needs two things: an offer of employment to work as an SLP in Ontario and a mentor. The important point is that being close to registration is not the same as being registered. Until CASLPO has completed the process and issued the certificate, the applicant is not authorized to practice as an SLP in Ontario or use the restricted title. So this slide gives a simple timeline for the scenario. We're looking at two key dates and two key issues that may be relevant when assessing good character for registration. So on December 9th, 2024, there is a concern related to title infringement. In this context, title infringement means using the protected professional title or presenting oneself in a way that may suggest registration or authorization when the authorization is not in place. The next key date is February 1st, 2025, when a cease and desist notice is issued. This is important because it shows that the applicant was formally put on notice that there is a concern about their conduct. For the purposes of this presentation, the key question is not only whether the original issue occurred, we're also wanting to consider what happened after the applicant became aware of the concern. So now that we've kind of looked at that basic timeline, let's consider why this type of scenario could delay an applicant's registration. The concern is not necessarily limited to the title infringement itself. CASLPO would also need to consider the applicant's conduct after the issue was identified. For example, did the applicant understand that the title was protected? Did they take steps to correct the issue once they were notified? Did they communicate honestly and transparently with the college? And did their response demonstrate professional judgment? This matters because registration is not only about meeting education or practice requirements. It also involves assessing whether there is a reasonable basis to believe the applicant can practice safely, honestly, lawfully, and professionally. The applicant's response to the concern can be just as important as the original concern itself. A mistake or misunderstanding may be addressed, but failing to respond appropriately, continuing the conduct, minimizing the issue, or being dishonest can raise broader questions about professionalism, accountability, and readiness for registration. So after reviewing the application and the applicant's submissions, the registration committee has decided that the applicant may be issued a certificate of registration, but not without restrictions. The committee has determined that terms, conditions, and limitations should be placed on the applicant's certificate. This is an important distinction. The applicant is not necessarily being refused registration, but the committee is not satisfied that unrestricted registration is appropriate at this stage. The terms, conditions, and limitations are intended to address specific concerns identified during the review. This may be used to support public protection, ensure accountability, and give the applicant an opportunity to demonstrate that they can practice safely, honestly, lawfully, and professionally. So for our purpose, we should focus on why the committee would impose conditions, what those conditions are meant to address, and how they relate back to the good character concern raised in the application. Working without registration calls into question the applicant's ability to practice in accordance with the law, the applicant's honesty and integrity, and their professional attitude. Now that we have finished discussing good character, we're going to shift to another core registration requirement, the registration examination. Good character focuses on whether there is reasonable basis to believe that the applicant can practice safely, honestly, lawfully, and professionally. The examination looks at a different but equally important question: whether the applicant has demonstrated the required entry to practice knowledge and competencies. For CASLPO registration, applicants must successfully complete a registration examination that has been approved by the college's board of directors. Across Canada, many regulators have designated the Canadian Entry to Practice Exam, or CETP exam, as the examination that satisfies this requirement. The CETP exam for audiology and speech-language pathology are administered by Speech, Language and Audiology Canada, also known as SAC, which is the National Professional Association. Now, we're going to look more specifically at timing of the CETP exam in relation to registration. So applicants seeking an initial certificate have two options for completing the CETP exam. The first option is that they successfully complete the CETP exam before registration. In this case, the applicant has already met the registration requirements or the examination requirement before an initial certificate is issued. In the second option, the applicant can become registered first and then take the CETP exam during that first 6-month term of their initial certificate. This gives the applicant some flexibility in timing, but it's important to plan carefully. The initial certificate provides a defined 6-month period to complete the exam requirement. To continue with registration beyond this period, the CETP exam requirement must be successfully completed. If the initial registrant fails the CETP exam during their initial practice period, the registrant's certificate will expire within 30 days of receiving notice from the college. And the former registrant must then pass the CETP exam before submitting a new application and continuing with their initial practice registration. Similarly, if an applicant fails the CETP exam before registration on their first attempt, the applicant must pass the CETP exam before an initial certificate will be issued. So the key takeaway is that an applicant does have two pathways in which they can complete the exam. Either they can do it before registration or they can complete it during that first 6-month initial practice period. If applicants have questions about the exam itself, they should contact SAC, since SAC administers the exam. This includes questions about the exam format, enrollment fees and dates, eligibility requirements, the enrollment process, and testing accommodations. SAC also provides exam preparation resources. These resources can help applicants understand what is expected and how to prepare. Examples include information about writing a competency-based exam, CETP exam preparation tips, webcasts, handouts, practice questions, and preparation study guide. The point is that CASLPO sets the registration examination requirement, but SAC is the organization to contact about the exam administration, logistic questions, and about exam preparation resources. That brings us to the end of our discussion about registration examination requirements. At this point, I'd like to hand things over to Vera, who'll take us through the next part of the presentation, becoming a CASLPO registrant.
All right, thanks, Colleen. So CASLPO has two steps for the registration process. So the application process and then the registration process. And I will be discussing the application process. All right, so where do you start with your application? So to access the online application, you need to go to CASLPO's website, which is caslpo.com. And from the menu options, hover over the Applicants tab and click on Canadian Accredited Programs. So before you begin your application, we strongly recommend reviewing the available resources and guides in our website. And there's also an FAQ section on this webpage that may answer many of your questions. So taking the time to review this information before contacting CASLPO can help save time for everyone. And an application portal guide handout is also available as part of this webinar, which you can refer to as you work through your online application. So overall, it's best to read through all the available resources before you start your application. So after you've read all the resources on the website relating to the application process, you may proceed to access the online application link via the same web page. So when you scroll down, you'll see this access the online application button, or you can also visit members.caslpo.com. So when you first open the application link, you'll see a login page, and this login is only for existing registrants and not for applicants. So for applicants, you need to click on the Apply to the College button. And once you start your application, you'll receive a unique access link by email, and make sure to use that link each time you wish to return to your application. So don't try to log in with your email here, as you'll get an error saying that there's no account associated with it. So let's go through some reminders as you fill out the online application. So when first creating your application, you need to add CASLPO's domain, which is @caslpo.com, to your email services safe sender list. So this just ensures that all communications from CASLPO will be received and will not go into your spam or junk folders. So the link to your application will also be sent through email, and make sure that the email address you are using does not contain an abbreviation of the protected titles discussed earlier. So using SLP, AUD, or speech language pathologist, audiologist, or anything that suggests that you are practicing as a professional in your email address, email signature, or even presenting yourself as one who is registered in Ontario while you're still in the application stage is a violation of the Audiology and Speech Language Pathology Act. So we also recommend using a personal email address instead of a university or organizational one, just to avoid any issues in the future if you lose access to that account. So be sure to click on the correct type of application, which in your case would be the Canadian Accredited Program Graduate. So make sure to read through the information to ensure that you have the requirements and instructions on how to send them. For instance, transcripts must come directly from the university, or it may be sent through a secure electronic transcript system. And the letter from the program director confirming that you have completed your program is only required if your transcript does not indicate that your degree has been conferred. So important information can be found in this page. So the application portal is divided into 9 sections that you'll need to complete. I won't be showing each section as it is outlined in the application portal guide, but just to go through them quickly, we have the identification section, the contact information section, and the Canadian entry to practice exam, where it asks for information on whether you've taken the exam, if you've passed or failed, and when you took the exam, and education background. Professional registration asks if you have been or are currently registered with another regulatory body, whether inside or outside Canada. Next is the conduct questions, your education or your practice recency. So this asks how if you've been practicing before outside Ontario and how long ago was it. And then the final declaration and the payment of the application fee. So it's important to note that each section has a help button in the top right corner that you can use if you need guidance while filling it out. So take your time going through each section and make sure all the information you enter is accurate before moving on. So the application portal guide also gives in-depth step-by-step instructions on how to fill out each section, and it would be very helpful to have this guide open as you navigate through each section. So as you move through every section, you will be required to declare the information you input as correct and complete. And this final declaration will come up once you have completed the declaration for every section. So you need to read through this carefully in order to move on to the payment section. So once you've carefully read the declaration, simply type your name, and when ready, click the green button that says, I confirm that I have read and understand the above declaration. And the pop-up will ask if you are sure. Click yes when you are. So once you submit your declaration, a payment section will appear. And at this point, an application fee of $150 is due. So click on the green button to proceed with payment by credit card. And you'll be redirected to the Worldline website to complete the transaction. And from there, just enter the required payment information and submit it to finish the process. So now let's discuss the documents that you need to submit with your application. First, your official university transcripts. Again, these can be sent by mail or as a secure e-transcript. So if they're mailed, the envelope must be sealed by the university, and it can also be mailed directly to CASLPO by the program director or other designated department personnel. Next is a letter from your program director, and this is only required if your degree has not yet been officially awarded. It can be sent by mail or emailed directly by your program director using an official email address. And next is a verification of registration, only if this applies to you. So this must come directly from your regulatory or licensing body and must be sent to CASLPO by mail or email using an official email address. And the VOR form is available for download in the application portal. So part of the requirements is proof that you are eligible to work in Canada. So if you're a Canadian citizen, acceptable documents include identification pages of your valid Canadian passport, Canadian birth certificate, or both sides of your Canadian citizenship card. And if you have Indigenous status, you may provide a valid certificate of Indian status, including a secure certificate of Indian status as proof of eligibility to work in Canada. And if you're not a Canadian citizen, you must provide valid immigration or employment authorization, such as record of landing, a permanent resident card, or a valid work permit. So if you have not yet received your work permit or post-graduation work permit, you may submit the work permit extension letter for PGWP, and this may be accepted on a conditional basis, provided that you submit your work permit as soon as it becomes available. And ensure that all documents are scanned clearly and uploaded as PDF files. So where should your documents be submitted? So official transcripts, letters of completion, and VORs must be original documents and sent directly by the institution. So they should not be submitted by the applicant. They can send them to CASLPO in one of two ways, either by mail in a sealed envelope sent to the address provided on your screen, or electronically, either from the university's official email domain, or through a secure e-transcript system, such as Parchment, to the email address provided in your screen as well, using the institution's official email address. An important question is, how long does the process take? So processing starts once your application is received. It is considered active or received once you have paid for and declared your application is complete. And it takes up to 15 days to complete the intake assessment. So you'll be notified by email about which documents have been received and which are still outstanding. You'll also be able to track your application through the applicant portal using the unique application link that was sent when you created your application. And once you've submitted all your required documents, your application will be moved to the review stage. So CASLPO must process applications as quickly as possible and in the order that they are received once they are complete. And this is in line with the Office of the Fairness Commissioner of Ontario. So we request that you do not call or email the college to ask about your application status or to request that your application be expedited. So responding to these types of inquiries can take staff time away from processing applications, and the order of applications cannot be changed. So it's best to wait for official updates, which will be sent to you by email. So let's consider a real-world example. So Bashir wants to confirm that CASLPO received the email his university sent us the day before containing his letter of completion. So should Bashir contact the college to confirm that CASLPO received this document? So is it yes, no, or maybe? So the answer is no. CASLPO will notify him within 15 days if the document has been received and if any remain outstanding. So be sure to plan ahead, discuss CASLPO timelines with potential employers. You can also visit the CASLPO website to stay updated on timelines and fees. And remember that CASLPO maintains procedures that are transparent, impartial, objective, and fair, and we do not offer any preferential treatment. Applications always get processed in the order in which we receive them. So just a couple of reminders. Be sure to select the correct application type, use a personal email address with no protected titles, finish and ensure all information is correct before each declaration, be honest in the conduct questions, and you will not be able to make any changes from your end once you have declared your application as complete and correct. So if any changes are necessary, please contact registration@caslpo.com, and CASLPO timelines are available on the website and only follow up when it is past the recommended timelines. So with that, I'll be passing the floor back to Colleen to discuss the registration process.
All right, then. Okay, so now that we've reviewed the application process, we're now going to shift focus to the registration process. The application process is about submitting the required information and documentation so that CASLPO can assess whether or not the application requirements have been met. The registration process begins after CASLPO has reviewed the application and determined that you are eligible to move forward. At that point, the college's program assistant will activate the registration section of your application portal. And this step will be the next step towards becoming an initial registrant, but it's important to understand that you're not yet registered at this stage. Before a certificate of registration can be issued, you will need to complete and submit the required registration information through the portal. To issue an initial certificate, CASLPO needs confirmation that an applicant is ready to begin mentorship in Ontario. First, the applicant must have an offer of employment in Ontario to work as an audiologist or speech language pathologist. Then the applicant must have an eligible mentor lined up. We need to know the mentor's name, their CASLPO registration number should also be provided to us. If you are looking to find out what your mentor's registration number is, you can look them up on CASLPO's public register, and their registration number would be available on the public register. CASLPO also confirms, I guess, within that registration section, again, we would ask you to confirm your CTP exam status. This means indicating whether or not you have enrolled for the exam, written the exam, or still need to complete the exam. If you wish to take the CETP exam before becoming registered with CASLPO, if you want to complete the CETP exam after becoming registered with CASLPO, you must submit a signed undertaking. This undertaking confirms that you agree to take the CETP exam at the next available sitting after you become registered with CASLPO. So timing is important because CASLPO needs enough time to process the registration form and issue the certificate before you begin working. The registration section of your online application must be submitted at least 2 weeks before your employment start date. Applicants should not begin practicing until after they have received an email indicating that their certificate has been issued. The registration section of your application asks you to provide your employment start date, your practice location, your HR contact information, and your professional liability insurance details. Professional liability insurance information should include the carrier's name, the policy or certificate number, and the certificate's expiry date. Applicants are required to have coverage of at least a minimum of $2 million per claim. You must also pay a registration fee of $50 and a prorated annual fee. So CASLPO's annual fee is prorated quarterly for the registration year. So for example, if you are becoming registered close to the end of our registration year, you are paying for just 1/4 of the registration amount or the annual fee amount. As a general guide, applicants should avoid submitting the registration section too early. Submitting it too early means that it's earlier than 3 weeks before your anticipated employment start date. This helps ensure that the college is able to align your mentorship timeline with when your certificate is issued. A file may be put on hold if concerns arise during the application or registration process before a certificate is issued. Examples of concerns could include using the protected title before registration, holding oneself as able to practice before registration, or I guess we would say if any of these concerns arise, your application may need to be referred to the college's registration committee for consideration. This can significantly extend the timeline associated with registration because the committee meets quarterly and the review process can take an additional 3 to 6 months to complete. So once your initial certificate is issued, you will receive a CASLPO registration number. Additionally, your information will appear on CASLPO's public register. So only after a certificate has been issued can you begin using the restricted title of either audiologist or speech language pathologist in Ontario. This is a point where your employment as an audiologist or speech language pathologist and your mentorship can start under your initial certificate. It's important to remember that CASLPO can only discuss application information with the applicant unless written authorization has been provided to the college. It's for confidentiality reasons. The college cannot provide application information to a parent, a spouse, or employer without an applicant's written authorization. This helps prevent delays, errors, and misunderstandings caused by information being shared through a third party. Before becoming registered with the college, applicants may choose to begin working as support personnel. This is an opportunity to gain exposure to practice while your application is still being processed. It's important to remember, however, that support personnel are not CASLPO registrants. So before you receive your certificate of registration, working as support personnel may be an option. Once you are registered, your role and responsibilities change because you are um, then accountable as a regulated professional. So before we leave the discussion about working as support personnel, it is important to emphasize that the shift that will happen once you become registered with CASLPO. So once you become a CASLPO registrant, you are responsible for, I guess, your practice, and you are now accountable to the college and must meet those ongoing obligations that apply to all of CASLPO registrants. One of those obligations is annual renewal. So CASLPO must renew, I guess all CASLPO registrants must renew their certificates of registration every year. The registration renewal deadline is October 1st every year, and that's when you're expected to renew. Even when you become registered, say you become registered before October 1st, you are expected to complete your renewal and submit it by October 1st because your current certificate expires at the end of that September of that same year. So as you start your life as a CASLPO registrant, it's important to note that you have ongoing professional and administrative responsibilities to maintain your certificate and remain in good standing with the college. As we wrap up these key points, keep in mind is first, registration confirms that a person is authorized to practice in Ontario. Applicants should not begin practicing until CASLPO has issued their registration number. Second, good character remains important throughout the process. Applicants are expected to act honestly, professionally, and in the public interest from the time that they apply through to registration. To become registered, applicants should start by reviewing the application guide before beginning their application. The application guide is located on our application webpage. They should also use the unique link that they will be sent once they've started the application to access their application portal and submit their application. So remember, it's through a unique link that you're applying. And after submission of your applicants should watch for CASLPO's acknowledgement email within 15 days. The email confirms receipt of the application and also identifies any missing documents if applicable. CASLPO begins its review only once the application is complete, so it's important to submit all required documents as early as possible. A key reminder is that applicants should avoid any title use, holding themselves out as registered, or practicing before registration. Concerns in these areas may delay your registration and could require review by CASLPO's registration committee. That brings us to the end of the section about registration, and we're going to now shift to a major part of today's presentation, which is about mentorship.
Thank you for your patience while I was getting the screen up and running. Before we jump into this section of the presentation, I just want to remind you that we will have a Q&A section at the end of our discussion on the mentorship program. However, if you have any burning questions that you'd like to ask before that time, please use the ribbon at the top of GoToWebinar under the questions section. You can type in any questions that you might have and submit them in preparation for our Q&A. All right, so what is CASLPO's mentorship program? It's important that you do not confuse mentorship and supervision as being the same thing. Mentors are not supervisors, and mentorship is not supervised practice. This means that you are accountable for your clinical work and decisions during the mentorship period. What does it mean to be accountable for your own practice? It means that you are a professional and you are expected and required to explain your actions and decisions. Let's first consider this scenario that illustrates professionalism. Tanvi is an initial registrant who works as an independent contractor. Tanvi is told by a more experienced colleague that consent for assessment doesn't need to be documented in the patient record. However, that's incorrect. Consent for assessment must be documented according to CASLPO regulations and standards, as well as the Healthcare Consent Act of 1996. Regrettably, a complaint is filed to the college that involves Tanvi. During the investigation, patient records are reviewed, and it is confirmed that consent for assessment was not documented. Tanvi is asked to explain why they didn't document the consent, and their explanation is, I was told by a more experienced colleague that this wasn't required, so I trusted them and didn't question it. I didn't want to create tension in the workplace by asking this question. I was new and I didn't realize that this was wrong. Is Tanvi's justification reasonable? Unfortunately, it's not. Being naive is not a defense. To reiterate, being accountable for your practice means you are a professional who is expected and required to explain your actions and decisions, for example, doing things correctly and adhering to standards even when it's difficult or might upset an employer if you raise your questions. Professionalism is an attitude and personal philosophy demonstrated by a desire to always improve and learn, having sound knowledge of your scope of practice, as well as the limitations of your knowledge, leading when you are able, doing your best, maintaining professional boundaries, and always putting your patients first. Professionalism is also a set of behaviors. These behaviors include being responsible, reliable, courteous, respectful, and accountable. CASLPO's mentorship program has been in place since 1994 and serves as an introduction to the college's expectations of general registrants. Mentorship provides initial registrants with the support of an experienced colleague to ensure they have the knowledge, skill, and judgment to practice safely as regulated health professionals. Regulated health professionals who are mentees accept responsibility for their role in maintaining the public's confidence in the profession's ability to provide safe, quality, and ethical care by engaging in the career-long process of independent learning, action, and evaluation of their own competence. CASLPO's mentorship program supports registrants' understanding of regulatory requirements and ensures that registrants provide services in the public interest. Mentorship is a condition of the initial practice certificate of registration. Initial registrants must successfully complete mentorship before they can become general registrants of the college. The mentorship period serves as an introduction to the requirements of the quality assurance program that all general registrants must participate in. To protect the public, the college develops minimum practice standards that audiologists and speech-language pathologists in Ontario must meet. During mentorship, the mentor assesses the mentee's compliance with these minimum standards and decides whether to recommend mentees for a general certificate of registration. This recommendation is based on the mentor's assessment of the mentee's understanding and compliance with the college's standards. So you've completed your college application and received your CASLPO registration number. You've also been sent the mentorship program guidelines. To prepare for a successful mentorship period, you should discuss the guidelines and your mentorship contract details with your CASLPO approved mentor. Your next step is to review the mentorship contract together and complete it while referring to the mentorship program guidelines to ensure that you have accurately completed the mentorship contract for submission to the college. Please note that discussions with your mentor and completion of your mentorship contract should happen very early in, if not before, your employment begins. As a reminder, your mentorship contract must be submitted within 30 days of your first day of employment. That point is very important, so I'm going to say it again. You must submit your mentorship contract to the college within 30 days of your employment start date. As you complete your mentorship contract, you will need to consider and discuss several different factors with your mentor. Firstly, you'll want to ensure that the start date listed on your mentorship contract is on or after the date you've received your CASLPO registration number. Secondly, you'll want to discuss the mentorship process and minimum requirements that you need to meet. So the best place to start is to review the mentorship guidelines. This document is available on our website, and it introduces a mentorship program. It provides support for setting up a successful mentorship period. It sets out the college's expectations of you and other parties that would be involved in your mentorship. It also provides explanations of what their roles and responsibilities are. It discusses how to address situations that might impact your mentorship period and may be unique to you. It provides a checklist that will support your completion of the mentorship requirements, and it provides an overview of what to expect once mentorship is complete. You will want to review with your mentor how to obtain and document the minimum number of mentored guidance hours and patient care hours that you are required to obtain during your mentorship period. You will also want to discuss how you receive feedback from your mentor. For example, it may be appropriate for you and your mentor to review written reports, video or audio recordings of clinical sessions together as a form of indirect guidance. You will also need to determine how you and your mentor will work together so that you can receive feedback on your practice. Depending on your mentorship situation, it may be appropriate for you to receive feedback through face-to-face meetings or via written communication. Please note that there are several acceptable methods of guidance and feedback outlined in the mentorship contract, and you will want to select all of the methods that will apply to your practice during mentorship. There may be situations where you and your mentor require support to resolve a conflict. In these situations, you will work with a third party that is identified in the mentorship contract and who can support conflict resolution. Please note that you, your mentor, and the third party for conflict resolution must appreciate that they all have individual and distinct roles and responsibilities as it relates to conflict resolution. The college outlines the expectations of these parties in the sixth section of the mentorship contract, as well as page 9 of the mentorship guidelines. You will want to ensure that you review and are familiar with applicable CASLPO practice standards. It's important to discuss with your mentor the different resources available related to CASLPO's practice standards and identify which of those standards and associated resources are relevant for your practice. It will also be important that you identify which of these must be reviewed during your mentorship. You'll gain access to the mentorship self-assessment tool once your mentorship contract has been reviewed and approved. You will receive access to this tool along with your mentor via email. And in the mentorship self-assessment tool, you're going to complete a series of activities during the mentorship period. This includes self-evaluation of your practice, communication with your mentor through the MSAT, ratings on meeting practice standards and indicators, learning goals that need to be developed, and associated learning activities that need to be completed, a midterm and a final evaluation. During the mentorship period, mentees must complete a minimum 6-month period of mentored practice. Over this 6-month period, mentees must provide at least 500 hours of patient care, receive at least 48 hours of guidance from their mentor, use the clinical reasoning tool with their mentor for at least 4 case reviews, and complete the midterm and final evaluations in the mentorship self-assessment tool. This slide provides a summary of the 6-month mentorship period. The first 3 months of mentorship will focus largely on your ability to appreciate, understand, and be in compliance with professional practice standards and indicators. The midterm evaluation is done just after the halfway point. It requires several elements which are going to be discussed further on the next slide. In the second half of mentorship, mentees continue to evaluate how they're meeting professional practice standards and indicators, improve their awareness of the applicable legislation and regulatory standards, and engage in independent learning to achieve goals that were set at the midterm. In the final report, the mentor confirms that you've completed at least 500 hours of patient care, that you've received at least 48 hours of mentored guidance, and they will indicate if they recommend you for a general certificate of registration with CASLPO. Again, mentors base this recommendation on their observations of your practice, as well as evidence that you have provided that shows that you meet practice standards of the college. CASLPO will review the evaluation after it's been submitted by your mentor, and your certificate will be changed to a general certificate upon confirmation that you've met all the requirements of your mentorship period. There are 3 important deadlines in mentorship that mentees are responsible for meeting. You must submit your signed mentorship contract. Again, that's within 30 days of receiving your CASLPO registration number. It's important that you submit your mentorship contract as soon as possible to ensure that any time spent in mentorship is verified and therefore counts towards your mentorship period. Once you have submitted your contract, you and your mentor will receive instruction regarding access to the mentorship self-assessment tool, which is also known as the MSAT. In the MSAT, you will be able to review the remaining deadlines of your mentorship period. Please be reminded that the midterm evaluations are due 30 days after the midway point in mentorship, and your final evaluations are due 30 days after the 6-month mentorship period has finished. This 30-day grace period is intended to provide mentees and mentors with adequate time to fulfill the requirements of completing the evaluation. Remember that as a regulated health professional, completing your mentorship and demonstrating that you meet standards of the profession is your responsibility. You are strongly encouraged to contact the college by the midterm and/or before the end of your mentorship period if you believe that you will be unable to complete your evaluations as per the deadlines. As an initial practice registrant, you are able to practice to your full scope as defined in the Audiology and Speech-Language Pathology Act of 1991. It is important that you start your professional career by presenting yourself as a professional. This means that you need to monitor your deadlines, consult with the college as needed, and provide safe, quality, and ethical care to your patients. Be aware that during your career, there are important deadlines that will incur late fees if they are not met. As an initial practice registrant, you may be subject to late fees in accordance with CASLPO's Consequences of Missing MSAT Deadlines policy. You must be aware of your mentorship deadlines and the requirements that you must fulfill to meet them. Be sure to keep an open dialogue with the college in situations where you may not be able to meet these deadlines. This will allow the college staff to guide and support you in determining next steps required in your mentorship period. For example, if you're unable to meet the midterm report deadline because you do not have sufficient patient care hours 3 months into your mentorship, then you should contact the college. Staff can direct you to the mentorship extension request form and provide you with any additional guidance that you might need. we're going to speak about the importance of reflection and evaluation in mentorship. Regulated health professionals are expected to engage in self-reflection and evaluation of their practice. Principles of adult learning teach us that we are not always accurate or objective in evaluating ourselves, and that self-assessment is enhanced and more accurate with external input. This is the premise for peer assessment in the quality assurance program and the reason why we use mentors in the mentorship program. Mentors fulfill this important role of providing objective input to mentees on how they are meeting minimum practice standards. A mentor's role is to provide guidance and support to help mentees reflect on their practice and apply practice standards. To improve mentees' competence commensurate with their career stage, to apply principles of sound clinical reasoning, to observe and discuss mentees' practice and how they are integrating standards for the profession, to provide mentees with general guidance on practice issues, and to submit reports of mentees' progress to the college. Mentors can have a great deal of influence on a mentee at this stage of their career. Mentorship is critical in assisting new audiologists and speech-language pathologists to form positive habits early in their practice. CASLPO relies on mentors to fulfill this important role and support our mandate of protecting the public, but it also benefits the professions, employers, and interdisciplinary teams. There are two types of mentored guidance that contribute towards mentored guidance hours. These are indirect and direct guidance hours. The fundamental difference between direct and indirect guidance is whether or not the patient is present. In direct guidance, the patient is present and all appropriate consents are obtained, including consent for the mentor to observe the session. Indirect guidance activities are just the opposite, as the patient does not need to be present during mentored guidance. There is no minimum requirement for the number of direct observation hours that a mentor provides. The amount of direct observation is at the mentor's discretion and needs to be sufficient for the mentor to determine if the mentee has the knowledge, skill, and judgment to practice competently and in alignment with CASLPO's practice standards. To determine how you must meet direct observation hours, the mentor must consider the mentee's experience, skills, and confidence, the risks of harm associated with a particular clinical activity that's being performed, and the practice environment. Mentors must also consider how much direct observation they require to evaluate and comment on the mentee's ability to meet minimum practice standards. Now that we've completed an overview of the importance of mentorship, we'll provide some tips for positive and beneficial mentorship experience. Approximately 220 to 230 initial registrants that go through mentorship each year. The vast majority do very well because Ontario's audiologists and speech-language pathologists are very committed professionals. Some of the suggestions we will discuss relate to things you can do when you are searching for a job and things to think about as you begin your mentorship period. The last section of the presentation will review answers to some of the questions we field frequently in mentorship. Tip 1. Before you accept a job offer, take time to learn about the workplace or organization that you're planning to interview with. Clarifying information is very important so that you have a better idea of what to expect. Ask prospective employers what a typical workday will look like, whether there are experienced audiologists or speech-language pathologists on the team, what supports are available for new employees, and whether there are others in the organization who have provided mentorship before. For example, if you're considering working at a private practice, it may be helpful to ask how consistent your caseload will be to determine whether you will be able to get enough patient care hours and whether your mentor will be physically present at the same site as you. Your first job experience can have an important impact on the development of your career. You want to be in an environment where there is professionalism and you feel confident that appropriate practices are in place. The college regulates audiologists and speech-language pathologists. It does not have the authority to regulate employers or facilities where these professionals work. It's important to research organizations and the professionals working there to ensure that they are reputable. You are encouraged to use CASLPO's public register to search for audiologists and or speech-language pathologists that you might be working alongside in your new place of employment. The public register can be found on CASLPO's website. Ontario audiologists and speech-language pathologists are listed on this register, and it includes details of their registration with the college. This means that it will provide you with general information about the audiologist or speech-language pathologist practice, including any conduct history that they might have. Tip 2, consider looking at the company's publicly available materials. A review of these materials can help you to get a sense of the company's values, collective knowledge and skills, and future direction. This type of review may also help you determine if the practices of the organization align with CASLPO's regulatory requirements. Tip 3, consider whether you will be an independent contractor or an employee. You can negotiate or seek professional advice on contracts or verbal agreements before signing them. Tip 4, ensure that you can meet standards of practice as well as your professional obligations. During mentorship, you will be learning the standards, reflecting on how you meet them, and discussing this with your mentor. This happens in tandem with learning how to perform the expectations of your position. It's important that you understand the processes and protocols expected in your workplace for obtaining and documenting consent, and that they align with legislative and regulatory requirements. It is also important that you review the college's documents on record keeping and ensure that you understand the practices that the employer is using, including how clinical and financial records are stored and secured, as well as procedures associated with the release of information. It's important to ask the employer about their infection and prevention and control measures and ensure for infection prevention and control. It is also important that you are aware of your professional obligations. Practice advisors are able to help any registrants that have questions about meeting their professional obligations. Contact information for practice advisors is available on CASLPO's website.
I think we may have lost our connection with Cassandra. Hopefully she can rejoin the broadcast. Let's see. Maybe we can take a question while we wait for Cassandra to rejoin.
Absolutely. So we actually
have one for you, Colleen. So
Okay.
this person is asking, what would happen if we are not successful on the CETP exam but have been employed as an SLP? Would the employer be obligated or have the choice to terminate our position or offer a SLPA position?
Sure. So what happens is if you are holding an initial practice period certificate and you are working as an SLP or an audiologist, um, we would send you a notice that says you have 30 business days to discharge any patients that you have. So you have some a bit of time after you're notified to actually wrap up the or hand over the clients that you currently are um, working with. And we, I guess, do not regulate clinics or employers. So it is their decision how they wish to proceed with your employment, whether or not they wish to terminate your employment or to facilitate some sort of agreement for you to continue as support personnel. So that end of it is in the employer's hands, but we do try and hopefully facilitate a bit of a transitional period of 30 business days to get that sorted out.
Thank you so much, Colleen. I think Cassandra's taking a little bit of time, so I can ask you another question that we have. This question is asking, how long does it take to review somebody's application if they don't meet one or more of CASLPO's registration requirements and have to go to the registration committee?
So, what would happen is that when we've reviewed your application and we determine that there is a gap in your requirement, you don't meet a requirement, we will send you a notice of um, referral to the registration committee. And within that notice of referral, will indicate specifically what the deficiency is. And we will also provide you with information on your right to make a written submission. So once you get that notice of referral, you have the right to make a written submission within 30 days of receiving that notice. And once we receive your written submission, we will take the application to the next available registration committee meeting that's scheduled. As I mentioned, the registration meetings happen at least, we might have at least one per quarter. Sometimes we have more than one per quarter, um, depending on the volume of applications that we're dealing with. So you'll you can kind of factor in there's that 30 days to respond, and then depending on it could take a month or two to actually get to the next available registration committee meeting. And then once the meeting happens, everyone, the decision has to be written. Uh, so it takes about 5 weeks to write all the decisions for all the applications that were seen at that particular committee meeting. And so we usually say if you're going to registration committee, you should plan for it to be between 3 to 6 months in terms of turnaround for you to get your decision. So that's it. When it's going to registration committee, it does lengthen the process. However, on saying that, it's very rare for a Canadian educated graduate not to meet the academic requirements for registration. The only time that might happen is if it's a new program and there's still there could be some transition gaps there, but most requirements are still good. I hear Cassandra, I believe, are you available, Cassandra?
Cassandra is having some technological issues getting back,
Okay.
so she may not be able to join.
Okay.
Perhaps we can move to the mentorship section if you feel comfortable facilitating.
Sure. I guess let me just see. So Cassandra's having a hard time getting back into the webinar. Um, if Cassandra can let me know where she left off in terms of the slide, I had advanced my presentation, and I can kind of go back and try and go from there.
She was on tip number 5 in the mentorship section of the presentation.
All right, let me go back. All right, so I'm just going to share my screen and get us back on track. So we were on tip number 5, and so it was remember that completing your mentorship and demonstrating that you meet standards of the profession is your responsibility. Make the most of your mentorship by seeking peer support from your mentor and also colleagues, and approach your work with professionalism. So we have some FAQs. One is, I work most of the time in a hospital, and that is where my mentor is. However, I also have a part-time job at a private practice clinic. Can I have 2 mentors, one at each workplace? So the answer is that mentees must have a designated primary mentor in the workplace environment where they are spending the most time. A secondary mentor would be expected to provide additional support in the other practice setting. So you could have 2 mentors, but one would be the primary mentor and the other would be the secondary. So to reiterate, the registration regulation requires that you must be mentored in all your practice locations, but the roles and responsibilities of your mentors vary. For example, your primary mentor or designated mentor is responsible for working with you to complete and submit your mentorship contract and also the evaluations. They should be working with you most of the time and be listed on your mentorship contract as your designated mentor. In this situation, the hospital-based mentor should be your primary mentor. The primary mentor should be aware of all your practice settings and work collaboratively with your secondary mentors to support you during your mentorship period. The mentor is in a private practice setting should be your secondary mentor. They should be named in the appendix to your mentorship contract, and they will work collaboratively with your designated mentor to ensure that your primary mentor can evaluate your practice in both settings. So before you start your mentorship period, discuss arrangements with both mentors to ensure that all parties are aware of their individual responsibilities and the roles and responsibilities are outlined in CASLPO's mentorship guidelines. Can I change mentors in the middle of mentorship? Example, change of employment or a mentor goes on leave. So yes, it's possible to change mentors during the mentorship period. It's important to contact the college as soon as you realize that your mentor will change. This is necessary so that the college can support the transition process. To change mentors, you must submit a new mentorship contract to ensure that uh, your MSAT is updated with your new mentor's information. A written statement from your first mentor may be required depending on how far along you are in the mentorship period. If you know in advance that there is a possibility that your mentor will be on leave, discuss whether it makes sense to start your mentorship with them. You may wish to identify someone at the beginning of your mentorship period who will be able to take over as your mentor when transition is needed. This would allow CASLPO to verify that this additional proposed mentor meets the criteria to mentor at the beginning of your mentorship period and possibly minimize disruption to your mentorship period. So if you've worked for as many hours as you expected, but you still haven't had that 500 hours at the end, it's possible to get an extension, but you must submit a request. If you cannot complete mentorship within 6 months, you would follow the process outlined here to request an extension. Requests should be submitted to the college at least 30 days before the report is due or at the end of the mentorship. CASLPO evaluates extension requests on an individual basis before they are approved, and you will receive an email confirmation whether your extension has been granted. A final note on extending your mentorship period. According to registration regulations, extensions may be granted for an additional period of no more than 18 months. The college does not have the authority to extend mentorship periods beyond the maximum of 24 months. So we have a lot of mentorship resources that you can use in order for you to have a successful mentorship, and we encourage you to explore our website. Some mentorship specific resources include our mentorship program guidelines, our mentorship FAQs, our mentor training modules, and also CASLPO's mental health and wellness webpage. So you can also reach out to us, either if you have, we have a bunch of resources for the application process and as well for the mentorship process. And also we have our email addresses as well for both the application and registration process and mentorship. So just to let you know, we will be posting a copy of these slides on our website, as well as a copy of this video once we have rendered it. So now let's briefly discuss what happens after you complete your mentorship period. A general certificate of registration with CASLPO will be issued to you when you have successfully completed your mentorship, passed the CETP exam, and if applicable, fulfilled any outstanding orders issued by the registration committee. To maintain your general certificate, you must provide a minimum of 750 hours of patient care or related work in audiology or speech language pathology during every 3-year period, which begins on the day that you are issued your general certificate. You will also need to meet the requirements for the quality assurance program. The requirements for the quality assurance program are similar to those for completing the mentorship period. So, thank you so much. What we're going to do now is give you a few minutes to take a short 5-minute bio break, and then we'll be back to answer some more questions. So, if you can come back at 7:35, we'll continue with the presentation. Thank you so much. All right. I think we're back. And just an update, Cassandra is still having problems with uh, some of the technical pieces. So what we'll do is we will try to answer as many questions here, but if I'm not able to answer them, we might just get Cassandra to answer the mentorship questions personally after the presentation. All right.
Sure.
So
I was
let's.
going to say that sounds great, Colleen. And this is just a friendly reminder to folks. Thank you so much for submitting your questions. But like Colleen said, for ones that are really specific to mentorship, we'll have Cassandra answer them. And if we simply can't get to your questions due to volume, we'll also be sure to follow up with you in 5 to 7 business days. So thank you so much. Colleen, are you ready to field the next round of questions?
I am ready.
Awesome. Okay, let's get into it. So, this first question asks, how long is the CETP exam valid before registering with the college? For example, if someone passes the exam but wants to wait for a specific job opportunity before completing their registration, how long can they wait before the exam result expires?
Okay. So we don't have a specific deadline about the exam result itself. What we usually say is that um, the whether or not you have to rewrite the SAT or the sorry, not the SAT, the CEP exam is related to your currency. And by currency, we mean that um, part of the requirement for maintaining registration or becoming a general registrant is that you maintain currency, and that is that 750 hours every 3 years. And if you are no longer meeting that requirement, that means that you're not practicing. So if somebody is applying to return to a general certificate and they haven't been practicing for less than 5 years, um, we would, in order to get them back on track, we would require them to redo mentorship. If somebody has been out of practice for 5 years or more, that is when we would have them redo the exam and also do mentorship. So it's not, the exam doesn't expire if, say, you wrote it 5 years ago, but you've been practicing and are current. We would accept those exam results from 5 years ago. But if you stopped practicing 5 years ago and your results were also 5 years ago, we would require you to retake the exam after 5 years of not practicing, because the exam itself, we consider it a competency-based exam. So it answers questions to us about whether or not you have maintained your competence to continue practicing. So I hope that answers your questions. It's not an automatic thing to have to redo the exam. It's only if you haven't maintained your currency. That's when you would have to, we would consider requiring you to retake the exam.
Thank you so much. We have another question. This might be a bit more labor mobility related, but there are a couple of folks asking in the same vein. Somebody asks, is it possible to be registered with both Alberta and Ontario? And if I don't end up working in Ontario within the year and I only work in Alberta, is it still worth registering with both provinces if I need to renew my license annually?
So for Ontario to become registered in Ontario for the initial certificate, you have to have you have to secure employment in Ontario and secure a mentor in Ontario. So it wouldn't make sense for you to become registered in Ontario if you, yay, Cassandra's back, if you don't have a mentor or employment in Ontario. So having said that, if you do have employment in Alberta, you should, of course, obtain your registration in Alberta, and then you can apply to Ontario for registration through labor mobility. And the process for registration, once you become registered in another jurisdiction, is different than it is for a new graduate. So whatever entry to practice requirements you've met in that other jurisdiction, you're not required to provide evidence of, again, to the new jurisdiction that you have met entry to practice requirements. What we are looking for when you are transferring from one province to the other, though, is we're looking to verify that your registration with that other province is in good standing. And we're also looking to verify that you are maintaining currency. So once those two things have been verified and you submitted your application and paid your fees, you would be eligible for registration in Ontario based on having met the requirements in that other jurisdiction. So again, entry to practice requirements include things like, all those submitting your transcripts and writing the exam and those things, the initial practice period. Those are all part of Ontario's entry to practice requirements. So if you transfer from another jurisdiction and they have provided you with full registration status in that jurisdiction, when you come to Ontario, you're entitled to an equivalent certificate. So you would be getting a general certificate in Ontario based on your full registration in Alberta. So I hope that answers that question. It's probably best to become registered in the jurisdiction where you intend to practice rather than hold multiple registrations if you're not intending to practice in, say, Ontario.
Thank you so much, Colleen. I think we'll give your voice a much needed rest and we'll switch to Cassandra with many, many mentorship questions. So the first question that we have for you, Cassandra, somebody's asking if the 6-month mentorship period is the same as the ASHA clinical fellowship year.
No, they're not the same. They're very different requirements. So you can't use the time that you've done in the ASHA 1-year clinical placement to count towards your mentorship hours with the College of Audiologists and Speech Language Pathologists of Ontario.
Thank you for that. We'll move on to your next mentorship question, which is...
sorry, Colleen looks like she would like to add some information.
Oh, go ahead, Colleen.
Sorry about that. My mic was off. Just a side note to that is that if you have worked for a year in another jurisdiction, you could be eligible for a general certificate based on your practice experience rather than having to complete a mentorship program. So the requirement for a general certificate is either that you have completed CASLPO's mentorship period or that you have completed 750 hours worth of patient care related work in another jurisdiction within that 3-year period of applying for registration. So if you have that practice experience, you could apply for the general certificate based on that practice experience as well. So while the CETP year, or not CETP, clinical fellowship year isn't the same, your experience your hours of experience counts towards the general certificate as well.
Okay, fantastic. We'll go to the next mentorship question now, which somebody's asking Cassandra, what happens if they're not able to complete 500 hours of patient care within the 6-month mentorship period? For example, if they're only able to find a part-time or a casual position and they don't fulfill those 500 hours within that 6-month time period.
So the short answer to that is contact the college as soon as you recognize that you're not going to be able to meet those minimum requirements. College staff will guide you through submitting an extension request. Extension requests are reviewed, including rationale for why you might not be able to meet a requirement. So if you've completed the extension request form detailing the fact that you have part-time work, the number of hours that you're working, and it's taken into account by college staff, what we would do is actually look at the number of hours per week that you're working to try to determine what is an appropriate extension request length, noting that the maximum extension request that we can grant at any given time is 12 weeks. So part-time work is relative. Some people may be working part-time 3 days a week. Some may be working 4 days a week. It depends on your particular situation, and we would need to review the specifics of that situation as a part of your application for an extension.
Okay, thank you so much. I have another question for you. This one is asking, if I applied and got accepted with a particular company, but they don't offer mentorship, how would I go about finding a mentor for the mentorship program? Is there any guidance that you, CASLPO, can provide?
Yep. So if you are unable to identify an internal mentor, we recommend that you contact college staff. While it may be preferable for you to work with an internal mentor because of issues related to access to patient health information, it may not always be possible. In those situations, college staff can help to support and direct you to registrants who've identified a willingness to serve as a mentor. And then you would need to work you'd need to contact them to ensure that they'd be willing to work with you and that all of the steps are in place to ensure that they have access to patient and financial records as part of the review of your practice.
Thank you so much. Colleen, we have a question for you now, actually, Cassandra. Feel free to rest your voice for a bit. I believe you addressed this already, but there are quite a few questions in the similar vein. So I'll ask. There's folks asking, if they pass the CETP exam and then they begin practicing in another province, Quebec, for example, does their CETP exam result remain valid if they then come back to Ontario? And in other words, does their currency stay valid even if they've been practicing in another province with an active application in Ontario?
So what we would say is that there are different pathways to registration. And so we would say that you would not start an application in Ontario as a kind of new graduate and then practice in Quebec and come back to that same application. Because what we would recommend is that once you're practicing in Quebec, you're eligible for registration through labor mobility, which is a different pathway with different documents required. So, and through labor mobility, you are eligible for a what we would consider an equivalent certificate to the one that you held in Quebec. And so I guess that's the pathway that you should take and the documents that you should submit. And your exam is not relevant to a labor mobility application, while it would still be relevant to a application if you were applying as a new graduate. So just keep that in mind. There are different pathways to registration, and the requirements differ as you're going through the different pathways, and the documentation differs as you're going through the different pathways.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We're still on you, Colleen. So I'll ask this one, which is also for you. This person is asking if a speech language pathologist or audiologist is registered with CASLPO in Ontario and provides virtual services to clients living in another province, such as British Columbia, does that professional also need to be registered with the regulatory college in this other province?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
Absolutely. So they're essentially asking if they're an SLP or an audiologist who's registered with CASLPO, but they're providing virtual services to somebody, a client who is in a different province, do they need to be registered with that other province?
Yes, that the question, the answer is yes. If you are working in another jurisdiction, registration is required in that jurisdiction to provide services there. Um, we do have agreements with some of the other provinces for what we call a cross provincial practice certificate. And if you are going to be providing a limited number of hours of um, patient care in another jurisdiction, one of the jurisdictions that signed on to this agreement, you could uh, get that certificate in addition to having your CASLPO certificate, and you would provide, as long as you're providing less than 200 hours of service in that other jurisdiction. So the provinces that are part of this agreement are Alberta, Manitoba, New Brunswick, and Saskatchewan. So there's an opportunity there for cross provincial practice, as long as you're providing most of your hours in what you would consider your home jurisdiction of Ontario, and you are providing like a limited number of patient care hours in the other jurisdictions. But yeah, you would hold, in that situation, you're holding a certificate in Ontario for general registration and a CPP certificate in either Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, or New Brunswick.
Thank you, Colleen. That was a very detailed response. Do we
Yeah.
have time for one or two more mentorship questions? There's some for Cassandra.
Yeah, we have 6 minutes left.
Okay, phenomenal. I'll toss one over to Cassandra. So this one is asking, my mentor is external to the organization that is employing me. Can my mentor be offered compensation for mentoring me?
No. Regardless of whether a mentor is internal or external to the organization, compensation cannot be offered to a mentor for mentorship because of the conflict of interest that presents. There is a very comprehensive FAQ on the mentorship website that speaks to that exactly. So if you need to reference that information so that your organization is aware of that, go to CASLPO's website, and in the ribbon at the top, look at registrants, select mentorship, and then go to the bottom. There's an FAQ that would support that.
Thank you. And I'll mention to folks that we did link quite a few documents in the chat. So feel free to peruse those because I believe that we linked those FAQs. And for you again, Cassandra, I believe you may have already touched on this, but just for confirmation, are folks able to have remote or virtual mentorships?
Yes. That, at least as I understand it, meaning that you would be practicing at one site with an external mentor who is able to provide mentor guidance in that way. There have been instances historically where individuals who are in more remote communities and may be the only practitioner in that area will have an external mentor who can provide indirect guidance virtually, and there may be arrangements put in place so that direct guidance can be provided by them either coming to the site for a period of time or through synchronous virtual care.
Okay, thank you so much. I believe that we've covered all of the questions that we have in the chat so far. So I'll turn it back over to you, Colleen, Cassandra, and Vera. Colleen, you're on.
Sorry. Okay, so you still have the opportunity to send us questions if you have them by just emailing us. I guess the better contact information would be on the slide before the break. But again, we will be providing a copy of the slides and a copy of the webinar on our website, and we will email you when it's available. And so, feel free to send us your questions if anything occurs to you after the presentation. And we are so happy to have had you join us this evening. And we hope to have you have an easy registration process with us in the fall or summer. All right. So thank you so much and have a good evening.